prospective registrants to the Worldwide Booth Night and Reconnect programs, respectively. Thank you for helping us to move these traditional programs into a new virtual space. We cannot wait until we have it all clear to celebrate with you in person at these events again. Finally, I want to say thank you to our alumni who answered the call to speak on panels, host small group discussions, and share your personal and professional stories. Your openness is what makes this community so special, and that's what cannot be replicated anywhere else. Thank you. Now let's get excited to dive into the program. I'd like to introduce Heather Wade, class of 2018 EXP 23 alumna, who will be leading the conversation with Dean Rajan for us. Heather is VP at Merkle UK, managing teams who solve issues and create solutions using data and analytics. She has 15 years experience managing client-facing relationships and driving value across a range of industries, and also uses cutting-edge cloud technology, AI, and machine learning techniques to drive customer-centric approaches while focusing on excellent client service. Heather is also the president of the Chicago Booth Alumni Club of the UK and stepped into her role in 2020 just as the world was changing. She's led the UK alumni community through the pandemic and is, of course, looking forward to the day when she can attend the opening of the new London campus, as am I. And lastly, a very warm welcome to Madhav Rajan, Dean and George Schultz Professor of Accounting. Dean Rajan, thank you so much for being here and celebrating our community of alumni leaders with us. We are delighted to have you. And with that, I will hand it over to Heather to start the program.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Annie. Dean Rajan, I'm so pleased to be here with you today and to be here with all my fellow alumni. Really, really great to see you all from around the world. I'm sure we all love what we do for Chicago Booth. I certainly do. And we love partnering with the Alumni Relations team and to really create that meaningful engagement opportunities for the Booth community. So as I alluded to, this past year has been really challenging, and it's been an opportunity, an interesting opportunity for current students. A lot of us, I'm sure, have participated in the Alumni Relations series looking at career resilience, so connecting with students to discuss what's it actually like to study and to graduate within a crisis like this. So Dean Rajan, if I can ask you to tell us a little bit more about the student experience at Chicago Booth during the pandemic. And think a little bit around, in addition, how can we as alumni leaders help to make that student experience the best it possibly can be?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's certainly been an interesting year. As Annie mentioned, it's something obviously nobody could have or did prepare for. You know, these things happen once in 100 years if we're lucky. I would say that it's been an interesting change. So back last March, when we first went into the pandemic and we knew something was happening that had to be responded to, we moved immediately to virtual learning. That was a hard change because literally this happened a week before spring quarter, and the faculty had all prepared to do their teaching the way they usually do. So we literally had to tell them, take an extra week and switch your class completely to remote learning. What was great about that, I will say, is that we did not have to cancel a single class. And I doubt any of our peers can say that. All of our faculty stepped up in those 2 weeks, made the necessary changes. We obviously tried to provide resources to be able to do that, made the switch completely. And the other very Chicago thing that happened was that in many of our peer schools, there was a lot of discussion about grading and should we go away from providing grades now that we're in a virtual world. Our faculty did not want to do that. They said, no, we want to still hold the students to the same level of rigor, the same standards, and evaluate them like we've always done that. So the classes proceeded. And I would say, clearly it was not the same maybe as the experience that the students would have had in person, but on the whole, students were quite happy with the experience. And that's continued to today. Through last summer, of course, we had a chance to really reflect on how we had done the virtual teaching, how to make it even better. And I think the autumn went quite well. We had actually put a lot of resources into allowing for the possibility of what we call hybrid teaching, which is to say that we reconfigured the rooms for social distancing. We made it so that you could have a faculty member at the front of the room, a bunch of students in the room, and then we put in a bunch of screens so that other students could attend remotely. And so we went into autumn with the notion that we would have some in-person classes, some hybrid, and some kind of virtual. Now, the interesting thing that happened was that, and again, we're Chicago, right? We measure everything. With the hybrid model, it began, so we put in these very complex algorithms because our presumption was anybody who wanted to come in person, we should make it feasible for them to do it, right? So we had to put in a complex algorithm to say, okay, get feedback, make sure that we would find the algorithm so that everyone who wants to get in can get in and so on. Now, the way it started out though was like, most of the people who wanted to join in person did, but over the course of the autumn, that number fell monotonically. And so this is one of these things where we kind of learned quite a bit. The students really weren't super happy with the hybrid model because they were in the classroom, but honestly, it didn't feel like it was being in a classroom because we told them, look, you still have to wear your masks. We're not going to allow you to take it off and eat and drink in class. And so they felt, well, that's not kind of quite the same experience as being in class. And, the faculty member is wearing a mask. You can't hear, him or her maybe that clearly. So I would say on the whole, we learned that the hybrid model isn't as great as it was sort of cracked up to be going in. And so for the winter, we're mostly doing virtual learning. The interesting stat about that is last week I had a meeting with the student government, the GBC in Chicago, and they had literally no complaints about the classroom. They thought the classes were great, the curriculum was going really well, there was tremendous student and faculty engagement, and in fact, many faculty had figured out a way to use this new situation to their advantage. For example, by bringing in guest speakers whom otherwise, you'd have had to have them fly in and fly out, and that's sort of typically hard to do. So even last year, for example, Anil Kashyap, who many of you probably know, Anil brought in Janet Yellen as a guest speaker in his class, right, on sort of the money and banking type classes. So our faculty really have been trying to figure out what's the best way to teach in this environment. And it seems like for the most part, the students are actually very, very happy with the in-class portion of sort of what they're getting. Clearly, what's not great is the social stuff, right? The connections, the networking, both within their own class and across classes. And that's suffering, right? Because the city, like all cities around the world, has put limits on how big meetings can be. Our students sort of tested the boundaries of that once or twice, but we'll leave it at that. So I think clearly the non-curricular aspects are very difficult, but the curricular aspects are going very well.
That's great to hear, and I'm definitely not surprised that there was an algorithm involved in getting to the bottom of what was the best solution. So moving on to think a little bit more about the alumni events that have happened around the world over the last year. These have obviously moved virtual, and this has been really interesting because, in partnership with the Alumni Relations team, we've actually been able to have over 20,000 people attending, which is a fantastic result. And as you mentioned, this has actually created opportunities to connect over different locations and sort of different parts of the world. Do you feel that this actually might be the beginning of a new era for Chicago Booth, where there is some form of online learning, some virtual networking, and that deeper global reach that's a little bit more available and might become a bit more the new normal now?
I absolutely think that's the future. One of the silver linings of the pandemic is that we learned how to do online dissemination of content, if you will, which is something we all knew was coming. And by all, I mean, all universities, all companies, we all knew this was coming. This just accelerated things by 5 to 10 years, right? Yeah. And one of the silver linings is learning that we can connect with more alumni, reduce the frictions involved in being able to disseminate content, lower the barriers for faculty to be able to participate, and just achieve greater impact through that. So, for example, we do these distinguished speaker events. Typically we would fly somebody into Chicago. It was a big production, and we might do one a quarter. So when the pandemic hit last April, we moved those virtually as well, and we were able to do 5 of them in the spring quarter. Right? It was easier to get alumni to participate. And the topics in the last spring were mostly about the pandemic, how are companies responding to the pandemic. So we had Kurt Delbene from Microsoft talking about how is Microsoft responding to the pandemic. Jenny Scanlon, who's the CEO of UL, And we had Byron Trott talking about what does it mean to graduate in a very difficult environment. And he talked about how through his career, all the biggest breaks he got, the sort of leaps he made were all during moments of great crises, formerly with Goldman and then later with his own company. So we realized that we were able to get more alumni and get more participation, right? The number of people who were attending these virtual events was, many multiples of what we would get in sort of an in-person event. And then we realized, well, we could do special events for, EMEA. We could do special events for Asia at times that were better suited for them. And we started doing more of these events through the summer and the autumn. So I do think that's the future. In some of our summer classes, so we usually will have some of the EXP students come to Chicago, take classes,
Yes.
In Chicago in the summer. Well, we did some of those things virtually and got huge take up. Even for some of the classes we taught in the summer, if we had spaces open, we allowed alumni to be able to participate in those as well, and that was a big hit. So something that seemed almost like a fantasy, right? Like being able to pass on the most current content, what are our faculty thinking, to our most engaged alumni, that sort of became a reality now. And the question sort of going forward is, the things that we have changed because of the pandemic, how many of those will we keep because they're simply a better way to sort of do things? I'll give you another small example. We when we have people who donate money to the school, we would usually write them a letter and mail it to them, right? And half the time we didn't have addresses for people. We didn't know if they would get it or not. And now we do it, we write the letter, we just PDF it and we send it to them. And it's working much better, right? To be honest, people love the response. They're able to get it, save it. They're able to respond back to us about what we wrote to them. And we had a discussion yesterday, and Annie was in it. And we said, this should be the future, right? We should just sort of keep doing that. So many, many things we have learned we were doing one way because we had been doing them one way for a long time. And the pandemic forced us to make changes. And then how do we sort of proceed along those lines is a key part. So I absolutely think that's the future. We will be doing more events virtually, more events targeted to different regions of the world at times that work for them. We'll be able to save those events, put them on our website or our YouTube channels for people to access later. I absolutely think that's the future.
Fantastic, thank you. You touched a little bit in your previous answer on sort of faculty and sort of things like that, and I'd like to dig into that a little bit. We're always excited about Booth faculty, thinking about who the new people coming in are, hiring, some new star faculty members. Can you talk a little bit about some of the recent new faculty hires, maybe some great research that's going on in the pandemic, maybe even spurred on by this sort of crisis that we've been in for the last year as well?
Yeah, again, the pandemic has been a great, I would say, opportunity area for our faculty to really show what they're the best in the world at. And many of them had been doing work related to these sort of economic issues in particular, even before the pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, they sort of turned to that as the focus of the work that they do. And if you're in the US, if you were reading, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, so many of the articles that were written at the time were by our Booth faculty. We had articles by Richard Taylor about, what's the best way to try to disseminate the vaccines. And, I don't know if you read that. He said, well, you should save a few of them and auction them off and use that money to subsidize people who had been hurt by the pandemic, which of course people don't want to do, but it's a brilliant idea. So he had a bunch of op-eds about that. Senthil Mullainathan, whom I don't know, many of you may not know, Senthil was somebody we hired from Harvard Economics a couple of years ago. He's a superstar, right? And so he's been doing a bunch of work as well about how are local communities being affected by COVID. What are practical steps that can be done to sort of help them? Chad Syverson, Austin Goolsbee did a bunch of papers on using mobile data on, as the pandemic hit, how did people actually change their behavior, right? Was it really the government lockdowns that made people change their behavior, or was it fear of getting the virus that did? And so Austin particularly has some great op-eds he wrote based on this academic paper in the New York Times. So that's been great. We've had faculty, one of our faculty made Joe Vavra wrote the paper on as the US was giving stimulus payments, how were they actually being used, right? Were some people actually getting paid more through the stimulus checks than what their regular jobs were giving? And is that going to be inflationary and so on? So these papers had huge impact from a practical standpoint. You know, Joe's papers were being cited in all the congressional discussions about how big the stimulus should be. Was it too big, too small? So it's been actually great to see how our faculty have responded, taken the lead, and really had taken this sort of intellectual, you know, front position, if you will, in all the discussion. And we had a version of the Chicago Booth Review, one edition last year, which focused purely on faculty research on the pandemic. So that's been fantastic. To the other question on recruiting, last year when this hit in March, we had thankfully finished our recruiting before the pandemic hit, and we had to go, you know, the university then went into, you know, a hiring freeze, wage freeze, all of that stuff, like I'm sure many of you have had to face as well. We luckily were able to finish recruiting sort of before that. And so one of the key faculty members we hired last year was Alex Todorov, who was previously chair of the psychology department at Princeton. So I would say the behavioral science faculty at Chicago, which is the group that Richard Taylor had sort of built up and mentored, has become this powerhouse now. So there's an award given in behavioral science for the best researcher in the field. It's called the Early Career Award by the Society for Social Psychology, and the sort of 3 winners in a row have been Chicago Booth faculty. Even though, you know, we're a business school, we're not like a psychology department. But Nick Epley, Eilert Fischbach, and then Alex Todorov, the guy we hired from Princeton, was the most recent winner. So it's kind of just cemented our dominance in behavioral science. And Alex is great. You should Google his name. It's Todorov. He's originally Bulgarian. He's done this great work on when you see people, how quickly do you form an impression of them? And it turns out to be frighteningly quickly, right? So, and he's done a bunch of work on, if I just look at people's faces, can I predict who'll win an election just based on sort of how they look? Wow. Very, very cool. So Alex came in last year. We also hired back a faculty member called Matt Noto, who had been at Chicago, left because he got early tenure at Northwestern Economics. So we hired Matt back last July. And Matt and Dan Edelman have now started a new healthcare initiative at Chicago Booth. So healthcare, obviously, a huge portion of the GDP in every country. And so we felt it was important to have a special initiative focusing on what courses do we offer our students in that space, what co-curricular activities, how do we scale up an MD, MBA program, right, where students jointly get their MBA at Booth and learn to be doctors at the University of Chicago. And so that's something we're very excited about. And just sort of going back over the past few years, our faculty size has gone up. When I started, which was what, 4 years ago, we were at 135 in terms of tenure line. We're now at 154. And that's a huge net increase because obviously faculty leave. Our sort of promotion and tenure standards tend to be pretty brutal, you know, with Chicago. So as people leave, though, we've been able to sort of increase and have these great outside hires. Other than Sendil, whom I mentioned, and Matt and Alex Todorov, we hired, you know, a couple of years ago, Ralph Koijen. Again, he turned down Princeton to come, and Ralph won the Fisher Black Prize, which is given to the top financial economist in the world under the age of 40. So the finance group is just incredibly strong, as it always been. And so overall, the faculty strength, which I know is a source of pride for you and sort of drives everything we do, I would say that it's probably the highest average level of faculty we've ever had at the school. And we're very, very proud of that.
Wow, that's amazing and really, really exciting to hear all the fantastic research that's come out in the last year as well. So thank you for that. I know we're going to run short of time in a few minutes, and there is one question, quick one at the end that I really want to get to, but just on the way there, as we start to wrap up, you know, as active alumni volunteers, you know, we know about the importance of things like the annual fund to the school, and, you know, a lot of us are involved within that. Are there additional school priorities that you would like us to specifically focus on?
I want to first go back and just thank the alumni. Without their engagement, their support, none of this would be possible. I mean, this is obviously a very, very difficult time for universities in the US. And for us, particularly as a school, that relies so much on the help and support of alumni. None of this would have been possible without all the work that all of you do. So I want to first thank you for doing that. And alumni obviously help in tremendous ways, right? There's the philanthropic part, which is supporting the annual fund. And that's how we're able to seed these new initiatives. When we start an initiative, that means it has no endowment behind it, right? There's no money. And so we're seeding it using money that we get from the annual fund. Even when Sendil first came, he's starting this new center on applied artificial intelligence, but a bunch of the research that we were able to fund to get this all going is stuff that we were able to fund through the annual fund. And also looking back last summer, Heather, I mean, the job market for students was not so great, right? We were very, very nervous about that. But at the end, we ended up with 100% of our students getting a summer internship. And it was largely through contacting alumni, talking to them and saying, hey, look, you know, we have some great students. It would be great if you work with them to give them a wonderful summer experience that will propel them to a big career going forward. And none of that stuff would have been possible without your help. So alumni are just so great in helping with, you know, not just the giving, but sort of hiring our students, mentoring our students while they're in the programs, through the various roles that they play, recommending new students to the school, talking to them to make sure that they're able to come to Chicago and not go elsewhere. So the set of things that you can all do, you know, through this ecosystem that you've created is incredible. And you know, the sort of thing we say, which sounds kind of trite, is you're a student for 2 or 3 years and then you're an alum for life. And so maintaining that community that all of you have, that sort of connection is super important. So you know, you've just done an amazing job sort of putting all of that together. Thank you.
No, our pleasure, and thank you. So last question, and when I saw this one, I just have to get to this. So we hear that you have great Netflix recommendations, and in particular, Indian matchmaking is a favorite, we believe. So any other recommendations for shows or things that we absolutely shouldn't miss?
I tend to recommend what I would call bad shows. I just tend to be ahead of the curve on them of people. Let's see, what am I watching now? I'll tell you one show which I love, probably the best show I've watched in many, many months. There's a show on Apple TV. It's called Ted Lasso. I don't know if any of you has had the opportunity to see that. It's a show, people in the UK would love it, especially because it's a show about an American football, like an NFL, you know, coach who becomes a coach of a soccer team in the UK, and the hijinks that ensue, you know, from that. But it's actually it's a lovely show. It's really about the character, the main coach, and just the way he coaches, I think is fantastic. He's all positive, right? He doesn't, you know, it's not like he has a great life. His personal life, as you learn, is not so great, but the way he approaches sort of coaching is all about optimism and energy and getting people to become better all the time, which I thought was just a great message. So highly recommend that. And we're also watching this French show called Call My Agent, which is quite funny. It's about, you know, a French sort of, you know, group of people who represent movie stars and all the stuff that happens. Again, not, if you're looking for, you know, high-minded TV, that's not.
It doesn't always need to be high-minded TV. No, that was perfect. On that note of optimism, I think I'd like to say thank you so much for speaking with us today. It was a great pleasure to be able to interview you today, and thank you so much for your time.
No, many thanks to all of you. Again, I hope that I can come out and see all of you in person. I'm desperately looking forward to coming to London again. I haven't been there in a long time. I'm hoping the stuff clears up so I can come and see the final of the World Test match if that happens, you know, so in June, July, anyway, fingers crossed for that one. But yeah, I think, yeah, I'm really looking forward to being on the road, meeting all of you in person when I can. But in the meantime, thank you for being such a great community and maintaining this online presence. So thanks so much, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bridget Anderson, and I'm from the class of 2008. And I'd like to just sort of take a moment to acknowledge everyone that's on the call this morning, all the amazing alumni volunteers from all throughout the world. Really happy to see you this morning. And as a quick side note, Dean Rajan has amazing streaming taste. We are 100% match in terms of all of those Netflix recommendations he just made. I love all those shows. Anyhow, I'm here to just sort of quickly talk about why I volunteer. So about 5 years ago, I decided to make some career transitions, and they allowed me to kind of be a little bit more centered in Chicago, and they allowed me to think about community. I was spending a lot of time thinking about what the Booth Black alumni community looked like, what the female alumni community looked like, people who were interested in entrepreneurship, innovation, social innovation looked like. And so with that kind of idea in mind, I set upon attending a lot of events, a lot of alumni events. I talked to people, I asked a lot of questions, and I tried to figure out where some of the holes were or some of the other ways to be involved. And with that in mind, I found some amazing collaborators and partners on a wide variety of initiatives that just made my experience amazing. And I hope that all of you have had amazing experiences too, as you've endeavored to build a better community. So that's kind of my quick testimonial about my experience as an alumni volunteer. Our final activity this morning is a workshop focused on leadership that will allow everyone to learn something new and network with our community of amazing peers. So I'm pleased to introduce Ruth Reiner and Jerry Richmond from the Global Career and Leadership Development Team, who will guide us from here. Ruth and Jerry, over to you.